James Dalton was a man who had mastered the art of success. His name was synonymous with power, wealth, and influence. In the towering glass offices of the city's most prestigious financial district, James was revered and feared in equal measure. He had built an empire from the ground up, turning shrewd investments and ruthless decisions into a sprawling fortune. Every detail of his life was meticulously planned and controlled, from the designer suits he wore to the exacting schedule he maintained. Yet despite the outward trappings of success, James's life was a barren landscape, devoid of warmth or joy. He had sacrificed everything, love, family, and compassion, on the altar of ambition. On a particularly bleak and rainy afternoon, James found himself running late for a meeting that could secure his position as one of the most powerful men in the business world. The weather was uncooperative, with sheets of rain hammering the windshield of his sleek black car as he sped through the city streets. His mind was a whirl of calculations and scenarios, his focus entirely on the deal that lay ahead. To him, the rain was merely an inconvenience, a barrier between him and the next big conquest in his relentless pursuit of success. As James approached an intersection, he barely registered the world outside his car. The city was a blur of gray buildings, slick pavement, and faceless crowds huddled under umbrellas. But as he turned a corner, something caught his eye, something that pierced through his steely concentration like a shard of glass. It was a figure huddled against the wall of a building, drenched by the relentless downpour. The sight was so out of place in his carefully controlled world that James instinctively slowed down. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It was a woman, barely distinguishable under the soaked, tattered clothing she wore. She was sitting on the wet pavement, her back pressed against the cold, unforgiving stone of the building behind her. In her arms, she cradled a small child, a baby wrapped in a thin blanket that did little to protect it from the elements. The baby's tiny face was red from crying, its cries lost in the noise of the storm. For a moment, James's heart seemed to stop. The scene was one of abject misery, a tableau of human suffering that was utterly alien to him. He had spent his life insulating himself from the harsh realities of the world, building walls of wealth and power to keep such sights at bay. But now, confronted with this image of despair, something inside him shifted. It was as if a long-forgotten part of his soul had been awakened, stirred by the sight of the woman and her child. James pulled his car to the curb, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Every rational part of him screamed to ignore what he had seen, to continue on to his meeting and secure the deal that would further cement his legacy. But another part of him, a quieter, more insistent voice, urged him to act. This was a man who had everything, yet here was a woman who had nothing. The disparity was too stark, too unjust for even James to ignore. Without fully understanding why, James found himself stepping out of his car and into the rain. The cold, wet wind hit him like a slap, cutting through his expensive suit and chilling him to the bone. He stood there for a moment, uncertain of what he was about to do, before slowly walking towards the woman. She didn't notice him at first, her focus entirely on the child in her arms. It was only when he stopped in front of her, his polished shoes inches from the puddle she sat in, that she looked up. Their eyes met, and James felt a jolt of something he hadn't experienced in years: empathy. The woman's eyes were hollow, filled with a deep, aching despair that spoke of countless nights spent in the cold, endless days of hunger, and a life stripped of dignity. She looked at him not with hope, but with a resignation that came from too many broken promises and too much pain. James struggled to find words, his mind a jumble of thoughts and emotions. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his keys. He held them out to the woman, his hand trembling slightly. "Take these," he said, his voice rough and unfamiliar to his own ears. "Go to my house. It's not far from here. There's food, warmth, shelter. Just take care of your baby." The woman stared at him, her expression one of stunned disbelief. It was as if she couldn't comprehend what was happening. In her world, people like James didn't exist, at least not as figures of kindness or charity. She hesitated, her eyes flickering between the keys in his face, searching for some sign of malice or deceit. "Please," James urged, pressing the keys into her hand. "You'll be safe there." Finally, as if coming out of a trance, the woman nodded. She took the keys with a trembling hand, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of saying something, but no words came. Instead, she clutched the baby tighter to her chest and began to rise unsteadily to her feet. James watched her go, his heart heavy with an emotion he couldn't name. He stood there in the rain, watching as she slowly made her way down the street, disappearing into the storm. Only when she was out of sight did he turn back to his car, feeling as though he had just made the most important decision of his life. As he drove away, his mind was no longer on the meeting, the deal, or the empire he had built. Instead, his thoughts were consumed by the woman and her baby. He wondered what they would find when they arrived at his home, what they would think of the life he had built, a life of luxury, devoid of love or warmth. The meeting was a blur. James went through the motions, delivering his pitch with the same precision and confidence that had earned him his reputation. But his heart wasn't in it. His thoughts kept drifting back to the woman and child, wondering if they had made it safely to his house, if they were warm and fed. The deal was sealed. The executives congratulated him, but James felt no satisfaction, no thrill of victory. Instead, he felt an emptiness, a void that no amount of success could fill. By the time the meeting was over and James returned to his car, the rain had subsided to a light drizzle. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, staring at the city lights reflected in the wet streets, before finally starting the engine and heading home. As he drove, a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation built in his chest. He had no idea what he would find when he walked through the door, but one thing was certain. Whatever awaited him at home, his life would never be the same. James Dalton sped through the rain-soaked streets, his luxury car cutting through the city like a blade. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the relentless downpour, and the city's bright lights blurred together in streaks of gold and white. Normally, he would be laser-focused, mentally rehearsing the details of his pitch, ensuring every word would be perfectly placed, every figure meticulously accurate. But today, something was different. His thoughts kept drifting back to the encounter he had just had. A fleeting moment that felt strangely significant, like a pebble tossed into a still pond, sending ripples through his carefully ordered world. The meeting was crucial. The deal he was about to negotiate would not only secure his company's dominance in the market, but also elevate his status to a level of untouchable power. It was the culmination of years of strategic planning, ruthless decision-making, and countless hours of work. Every element had been meticulously arranged, every contingency accounted for, except for the unexpected encounter with the beggar woman and her baby. James pulled into the underground parking garage of the towering skyscraper that housed his company's headquarters. The familiar surroundings should have grounded him, but as he stepped out of his car and into the sleek, polished environment, he felt an unusual sense of detachment. The image of the woman, drenched and desperate, holding her crying child, was seared into his mind. He had acted on impulse, something he never did. He had handed over the keys to his mansion, his sanctuary, without a second thought. It was as if someone else had taken control of his body in that moment, guiding his actions with a force he couldn't comprehend. He took the elevator to the top floor, where the boardroom awaited. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a long, gleaming hallway lined with glass walls. Behind those walls, executives and assistants moved with purpose, their faces set in expressions of determination. This was his world, a world of power, control, and relentless ambition. But today, it felt different. As he walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors, James couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted within him. The boardroom was already filled with people when he arrived. High-powered executives from his company and potential partners from the rival firm sat around a massive table made of dark, polished wood. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. All eyes turned to James as he entered, their expressions a mix of respect and expectation. He was known for his ability to command a room, to bend even the most hardened negotiators to his will. But as he stood at the head of the table, preparing to begin his presentation, he felt an unfamiliar sensation: doubt. James took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady and confident. He had delivered hundreds of pitches like this before, each one a masterclass in persuasion and strategy. But today, as the words flowed from his mouth, his mind was elsewhere. He could see the nods of approval from the executives, hear the murmurs of agreement. But the image of the woman and her baby kept intruding, like a ghost haunting his thoughts. He remembered the look in her eyes, how they had shifted from despair to disbelief when he handed her the keys. He had seen many emotions in his life, fear, greed, admiration, but never something so raw, so unfiltered. It had unnerved him in a way he couldn't explain. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain detached, to make decisions based on logic and reason. But in that moment, standing in the rain, he had acted purely on instinct, driven by something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. The presentation continued and James moved through his slides with practiced ease. He spoke of market trends, profit margins, and growth projections, but his heart wasn't in it. The faces around the table blurred together, their expressions of interest and calculation meaningless in the grander scheme of things. He thought about what the woman would find when she arrived at his house, the opulence, the luxury, the cold emptiness of it all. Would she feel relief, gratitude, or would she be overwhelmed by the stark contrast between her life and the one he had built? As James reached the climax of his presentation, the final decisive pitch that would seal the deal, he found himself hesitating. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure if this was what he truly wanted. The deal, the power, the money. It all seemed hollow compared to the simple act of kindness he had shown to a stranger. He could see the hunger in the eyes of the executives, the eagerness for him to close the deal and secure their futures. But for the first time, he felt no satisfaction in their anticipation. The moment passed, and James forced himself to focus. He delivered the final lines of his pitch with the same authority and confidence that had made him a legend in the business world. The room erupted in applause and the deal was done. Hands were shaken, contracts signed, and congratulatory smiles exchanged. Yet as James stood there, accepting the praise and accolades, he felt a deep sense of emptiness. The meeting adjourned and the executives filed out, leaving James alone in the boardroom. He stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below, the rain now a light drizzle against the glass. The skyline was magnificent, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. But all he could think about was the woman and her baby. He wondered if they had found warmth in his house, if they were safe, if they had eaten. The thought gnawed at him, overshadowing the triumph of the deal he had just secured. James left the boardroom and returned to his car. As he drove through the city, the lights and sounds of the bustling metropolis seemed distant, almost unreal. He felt as though he was moving through a dream, disconnected from the world around him. When he finally reached his house, he hesitated before getting out of the car. What would he find inside? The familiar comfort of his luxurious home, or something new, something that would change him forever? Taking a deep breath, James stepped out of the car and approached the front door. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and crisp. As he reached for the door handle, he paused, a sense of anticipation and unease building in his chest. He had no idea what awaited him on the other side of the door, but he knew that whatever it was, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that he could never have predicted. James Dalton sat in his car outside the office building, the glow of city lights reflecting off the rain-slicked streets. The applause from the meeting still echoed in his ears, but it brought him no satisfaction. Instead, a gnawing uncertainty gripped him as he replayed the events of the day in his mind. The woman and her baby, drenched in the rain, had left an indelible mark on him. He had acted on a whim, giving her the keys to his home, a decision so out of character that he scarcely recognized himself. The city was still bustling, though the rain had lessened to a gentle drizzle, casting a silvery haze over the streets. James turned the key in the ignition, and the car purred to life. He pulled out of the parking garage, merging into the flow of traffic. The rhythm of the windshield wipers was almost hypnotic, and he found his mind wandering back to the woman and her child. Who was she? What had brought her to such a desperate state? And why had he, a man known for his ruthless pragmatism, been compelled to help her? As he drove through the city, James couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that had settled over him. The rain seemed to muffle the sounds of the city, creating an eerie silence inside the car. His mind was a whirlwind of questions and doubts. What if the woman had taken advantage of his kindness? What if she had stolen from him or caused damage to his home? The thought of his sanctuary being violated sent a shiver down his spine. But there was something else too, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't fear exactly, nor was it regret. It was more like a deep, unsettling curiosity. James had spent his life building walls, both literal and metaphorical, around himself. His home was his fortress, a place where he could retreat from the world and its demands. Yet, in a single moment of impulse, he had handed over the keys to a complete stranger. The drive home felt longer than usual, each passing streetlight casting a pale glow on his thoughts. The closer he got to his house, the more his anxiety grew. What would he find when he opened the door? Would the woman and her baby still be there? Or would they have vanished into the night, leaving only questions in their wake? As he approached the gated entrance of his estate, James hesitated for a moment before pressing the button to open the gate. The iron gate swung open with a soft creak, and he slowly drove up the long, winding driveway. The trees lining the drive dripped with rain, their leaves shimmering in the light of his headlights. His house loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass, its windows darkened against the night. James parked the car in front of the entrance and sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. The rain had all but stopped now, leaving the air crisp and cool. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at the front door, the weight of the day pressing down on him. Part of him wanted to turn around, to drive away and leave the whole strange incident behind him. But he knew he couldn't. He had to know what had happened. With a deep breath, James stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. The sound of his shoes on the wet pavement seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet night. When he reached the door, he hesitated again, his hand hovering over the handle. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Finally, he steeled himself and turned the handle, pushing the door open. The foyer was dimly lit by the chandelier overhead, casting a warm, golden light over the marble floors. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint dripping of rain from the eaves outside. James stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the woman and her child. Everything seemed untouched. The furniture was in place, the artwork on the walls undisturbed. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Perhaps they had left, taking nothing with them. But as he moved further into the house, he noticed something that made him pause. A small trail of water droplets led from the foyer down the hallway, disappearing around the corner. His heart skipped a beat as he followed the trail, each step filled with a growing sense of unease. He rounded the corner and stopped short. The trail led to the living room, where a soft glow of light spilled out into the hallway. James could hear faint sounds, movement, maybe, or the murmur of voices. He took another step forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. The living room came into view, and what he saw there made him freeze. The woman was sitting on the edge of the couch, her wet clothes replaced by a plush robe that he recognized as one from his guest bathroom. She was holding the baby, who was now clean and dry, wrapped in a soft blanket. The fire in the fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm light over the room. It was a scene of unexpected domesticity, completely at odds with the image he had carried in his mind all evening. The woman looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she simply stared at him, as if waiting for him to react. James was at a loss for words. The sight of her sitting there, so vulnerable, yet so composed, sent a wave of emotion through him that he couldn't quite identify. Relief, anger, confusion, they all swirled together, leaving him feeling off balance. Finally, he managed to find his voice. "You're still here," he said, his tone more questioning than accusatory. The woman nodded, clutching the baby a little tighter. "I didn't know where else to go," she said softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. I hope you don't mind. I didn't take anything, I promise." James shook his head, his mind racing. He had expected, what exactly? A thief? A con artist? But this woman, with her haunted eyes and the baby in her arms, was none of those things. She was just a person in need, someone who had found herself in an impossible situation. "I don't mind," he said, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "You can stay, at least for tonight." The woman looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. James nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. The anxiety that had plagued him all evening began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet resolve. He didn't know what had compelled him to help this woman and her child, but now that he had, he couldn't turn his back on them. As he stood there, watching the firelight play across the walls, James realized that something profound had shifted within him. The cold, detached man who had left his office that morning had been replaced by someone else, someone who was beginning to understand the value of compassion, of human connection. And as he looked at the woman and her child, he knew that his life would never be the same again. As the night deepened, the rain outside softened into a gentle mist, wrapping the world in a hushed, serene silence. Inside the mansion, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm, golden glow across the living room. James sat in an armchair, his gaze fixed on Anna as she told her story. Her voice was soft but steady, each word filled with a quiet strength that belied the hardships she had endured. Anna spoke of the life she had known before everything fell apart. She had been a chef, a passion she had nurtured since childhood, creating dishes that brought joy to others. But a series of unfortunate events, a sudden job loss, a failed relationship, and the unexpected responsibility of caring for her sister's baby after her passing, had left her with nothing. The baby, her nephew, was the only family she had left, and she had vowed to take care of him no matter the cost. But as the bills piled up and opportunities dwindled, she found herself homeless, wandering the streets with the baby in her arms, desperately searching for a way to keep them both safe. As she spoke, James listened intently, his heart heavy with a mix of empathy and guilt. He had spent his life surrounded by wealth and luxury, never knowing the kind of struggles Anna had faced. Her story was a stark contrast to his own, a tale of resilience and survival, of love and sacrifice. It was a life he had never imagined, one that made his own seem empty by comparison. For the first time in years, James felt something shift within him. The cold, detached businessman who had once measured success in dollars and deals was beginning to see the world through different eyes. Anna's story stirred emotions he had long buried: compassion, empathy, and a deep yearning for connection. In helping her, he realized he had done more than just offer shelter. He had opened his heart to something far more valuable than any business deal. The night wore on, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Anna spoke of her love for cooking, her dreams of one day opening her own restaurant, and the hope that had kept her going even in the darkest of times. James, in turn, shared stories of his own, of the pressures of running a business, the loneliness that came with success, and the void that had grown within him as he focused solely on building his empire. As they talked, an unlikely bond began to form between them. They were two people from vastly different worlds, brought together by chance, yet connected by something deeper, a shared understanding of loss and a mutual respect for each other's strength. In the days that followed, the bond between James and Anna only grew stronger. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, drawn to her warmth and resilience. She, in turn, brought a light into his life that he hadn't realized he was missing. The mansion, once a place of isolation and cold efficiency, was slowly transforming into a home filled with warmth and laughter. Anna's presence, along with the baby's innocent giggles, brought life to the grand, empty rooms that had once felt so sterile and impersonal. James began to see the world through Anna's eyes, learning to appreciate the small moments of joy that he had overlooked in his pursuit of wealth. He found himself slowing down, taking time to savor the simple pleasures: morning coffee shared in the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, the sound of rain pattering against the windows as they talked late into the night. These moments, he realized, were the true riches of life, far more valuable than any deal he could broker. Moved by her story and inspired by her dreams, James decided to help Anna get back on her feet. He reached out to his network and secured her a job as a chef at one of his restaurants. It was a small gesture, but one that he hoped would give her the stability she needed to rebuild her life. Anna was overwhelmed with gratitude, her eyes shining with tears as she accepted the offer. But it wasn't just about giving her a job. James knew that this was about more than just providing financial support. It was about helping Anna reclaim her dignity, her independence, and her sense of purpose. It was about giving her the opportunity to do what she loved, to create and share her passion with others. And in doing so, he found that he was also giving himself something he had been missing for a long time, a sense of purpose beyond the pursuit of profit. As the days turned into weeks, James and Anna's friendship blossomed. She continued to teach him about compassion, kindness, and the importance of human connection, lessons he had long forgotten in his quest for success. He, in turn, became a mentor and friend, offering her guidance and support as she navigated her new life. The mansion, once a symbol of his isolation, became a place of refuge and renewal. The walls echoed with the sounds of laughter and conversation, the kitchen filled with the aromas of Anna's cooking, and the once empty rooms now brimming with life and warmth. James found himself enjoying the simple pleasures he had once taken for granted, reveling in the joy of sharing his life with others. And as he watched Anna flourish in her new role, her confidence and joy growing with each passing day, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had always measured success by the size of his bank account, but now he realized that true wealth came from the connections he made, the lives he touched, and the love he gave. The story ended not with a grand business deal or a flashy acquisition, but with a quiet moment of reflection. James stood in his living room, watching as Anna played with the baby, her laughter filling the room. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace that he had never known before. For the first time in his life, he was truly content, knowing that he had found something far more valuable than money or power. He had found a family, a sense of belonging, and a newfound appreciation for the blessings that life had to offer. And in the end, he knew that the greatest investments were not in stocks or real estate, but in the people who brought light and love into his life. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.